Hi children, I am going to start a new lesson. It is civics lesson and the title of the lesson is the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution. Now let us see. Let us start the lesson. For more than 200 centuries, our country was ruled by the Britishers. And when we got independence from colonial rule on August 15, 1947, our leaders wanted that democratic government should be established in India and not monarchy, because all these years, for more than 200 years, we suffered under the exploitation of the British rule. And at that time, many of the regions were under the rule of the kings. So they did not want monarchy to be established in India again. They wanted that democratic government should be established in India after independence. And they wanted the people themselves to rule the country with the help of elected representatives. That is to say, they wanted democracy to be established in India. And during the British rule, the Britishers followed a constitution which was prepared by the Britishers only. And after independence, it was decided to have a constitution of our own prepared by ourselves. And to achieve this, the basic principles for which India stood and also the procedures and principles by which our country should be ruled were put together and written down in a book which was called Constitution of India. What is this constitution? A constitution is a set of rules and regulations, and according to which the government is formed. According to these rules and regulations only, the government is formed, and also according to this constitution only, according to these rules and regulations only, the government functions. And how the laws are made, functions of all the government organizations and institutions, the president, the prime minister, other ministers, etc., how they are elected, all these are laid down in the constitution. And above all this, the goals for which India has to strive are laid down in the constitution. Now, making of the Indian constitution. Now let us see what were the conditions prevailing in India during the British rule. The British India was divided into some provinces like Madras province, Bombay province, Calcutta province, etc. And there were more than 550 princely states which were ruled by the native princes or native kings. And the country was partitioned on the basis of religion. Into Pakistan and India it was divided. And there were social and cultural diversities in the country. And there existed a huge gap between the rich and the poor also. And there were also huge differences between the lower and the upper caste. That means caste system prevailed in the society. There were many discriminations between the men and the women. And our national movement was not merely a freedom struggle against the British rule. It also sought to put an end to all types of inequalities which were prevailing in the societies, all types of discriminations, exploitation in the society. And literacy levels were very low at that time. You may wonder if I say the literacy rate in India at the time of independence was only 12%. That means out of 100 population, only 12 people knew how to read and write any language. And there was acute poverty in the country. Even for our basic needs, we had to depend on other countries. So it was necessary to set out future plans and give a framework to our plans. To give a framework means to give a shape to our plans to achieve these goals. No, though there were little differences among the leaders of the country regarding future government and future plans, how the constitution should be and how the government should be and how we should rule the country. Regarding all this, there were little differences among the leaders of the country. But most of the leaders agreed to the fact that after independence, India should be governed according to the principles of democracy. All the major leaders, they agreed to the fact that there should be democracy established in India. And a democracy in which all are equal before law. All must be treated equally before law. That means the same law should apply to all the people, and it is known as rule of law. Certain fundamental rights will be guaranteed to each and every citizen. They also agreed to this fact. And the government will be formed by general elections which are held on the basis of universal adult franchise. I hope you know universal adult franchise. If all the people who are eligible, they are given the right to vote, it is called as universal adult franchise. Right to vote is, if it is given to all the people, irrespective of their caste, religion, sex, etc., it is called as universal adult franchise. That means all the eligible people will take part in the elections. Now, early draft of the Constitution. Even before independence, in 1928 itself, a constitution was prepared for India by Motilal Nehru and 8 other Indian National Congress leaders. Together, they drafted a constitution for India in 1928. And in 1931, the resolution at the Karachi session of the Indian National Congress, when Indian National Congress was met in Karachi, in this Karachi session of Indian National Congress, it spelled out how independent India's constitution should look like, how the constitution should be. It was spelled out in that Karachi session. And both these documents, what are those two documents? The constitution prepared by Motilal Nehru and 8 other Indian National Congress members, and the resolution at the Karachi session. These two documents, they were committed to universal adult franchise. That means they were particular about implementing universal adult franchise in independent India, and also to grant right to freedom and equality to all the people. Now, what were the sources of inspiration for drafting our constitution? Our constitution makers were deeply influenced by the thoughts and ideals of Mahatma Gandhi, and they were also largely influenced by various kinds of struggles led by Indians and their aspirations to live in a better world. And secondly, many of our leaders were inspired by the ideals of French Revolution. What are the ideals of French Revolution? Liberty, equality and fraternity. These are the 3 ideals of French Revolution which influenced almost all the countries in the world. So even our constitution makers, they were inspired by these ideals of French Revolution, liberty, equality and fraternity, and the practice of parliamentary democracy in Britain, and Bill of Rights in USA, and the socialist revolution in Russia in 1917. All these factors together, they inspired our constitution makers. And thirdly, the British introduced some basic institutions of democratic rule in India. The British introduced some basic institutions of democratic rule in India, but all the people were not given the right to vote. Only certain categories of people were given the right to vote in elections. In British India, the last elections were held in 1937. To provincial legislatures, these elections were held, and these were not fully democratic. That means not elected by all the people on the basis of universal adult franchise, because that is the main feature of a democracy. Elections should take place on the basis of universal adult franchise. But the experiences gained by the Indians in the functioning of these legislative institutions helped them to a great extent. And that is why the Indian Constitution adopted many institutional details and procedures from colonial laws, mainly the provisions of 1935 Government of India Act. It was passed by the British government, and the provisions of this Government of India Act 1935 were adopted in our constitution. Now, the Constituent Assembly. To prepare the Constitution of India, Constituent Assembly was set up, and it was an assembly of elected representatives. Elections to Constituent Assembly were held in July 1946, and its president was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Its first meeting was held in December 1946. Elections were held in July 1946. Its president was Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and its first meeting was held in December 1946. With the partition of the country, the Constituent Assembly was also divided into 2. In 1947, after getting independence, that is after 15th August 1947, the Constituent Assembly was also divided into two. The Indian Constituent Assembly had 299 members and Pakistan Constituent Assembly had 86 members. And the new constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 26th November 1949 and it was implemented on 26th January 1950. And to mark the implementation of our new constitution, we celebrate Republic Day on 26th of January every year. Now the members of the Constituent Assembly were indirectly elected by the representatives of the provincial legislatures. And from princely states, I told you already there are more than 550 princely states in British India. And from these princely states, members were nominated to the Constituent Assembly. That means the members of Constituent Assembly were not directly elected. Some of them, they were indirectly elected. Who were indirectly elected? The members of Constituent Assembly in the provinces, elected by the representatives of provincial legislatures, and from princely states they were nominated to the Constituent Assembly. On the whole, the members of CA were not directly elected. Though the members were not directly elected, there were representatives from all the sections of the society. There were representatives from Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus. All these representatives were there. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, there were representatives from these lower castes also. And the assembly was dominated by the members of Indian National Congress because that was the only major political party at that time. So, the assembly was dominated by the members of Indian National Congress. B.R. Ambedkar, Sarojini Naidu, N.G. Ranga, T. Prakasham, Tangudir Prakasham, Nehru, all these were some of the members of the Constituent Assembly. And there were only very few women members, about 15 women members were there in the Constituent Assembly. First, some basic principles were decided and they were agreed upon by all the leaders. What are those? Like India, those basic principles are: India will be a sovereign republic, it should be a sovereign country, a republic. India will have several states with autonomous powers and it will be a democratic. Also that India will secure to all its citizens justice, liberty and equality. India will work for world peace and welfare of mankind. All these objectives of the Constitution were agreed upon by all the leaders. And this is called Objectives Resolution. And it was moved by our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. And these principles became guiding principles to draft the Constitution. Now, Constituent Assembly debates. Drafting committee was set up to draft the Constitution. And B.R. Ambedkar was its chairman. And in total, drafting committee was set up to draft the Constituent Assembly, to draft the Constitution, and B.R. Ambedkar was its chairman. And in total, there were 7 members in the committee, like Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, N. Gopalaswamy, B.R. Ambedkar, K.M. Munshi, Muhammad Sadullah, B.L. Mittas, and D.P. Khaitan. These were the members of the drafting committee. And framers of the Indian Constitution, they studied the constitution of all the countries and adopted many features from other countries' constitutions. For example, parliamentary form of democracy was adopted from England, and emergency powers, they were adopted from Germany. Like that, different features from different countries' constitutions were adopted in our constitution. A thorough discussion took place on each and every issue in several rounds, clause by clause. And there were many debates on many important provisions, and then final decision was taken by majority vote. And more than 2,000 amendments to the draft constitution were considered. This constitution, draft constitution, was made available to the public for a period of 8 months. And in these 8 months, the people were asked to give their suggestions or any amendments to the Constitution. And the Constituent Assembly received many suggestions from the people all over the country. They made many suggestions, and all these suggestions were incorporated in the Constitution. That is to say that more than 2,000 amendments to the draft Constitution were considered. When all the people made suggestions, 2,000 amendments were considered to the draft Constitution. And every word spoken in the Constituent Assembly was recorded and it was preserved. And these are called Constituent Assembly debates. Now let us stop the lesson here. I will continue it in the second part.